Hi guys, welcome to the Hidden Motives crime series. Today, we're going to take a closer look at another unsettling case. Out in the farmlands around Bellevue, Wisconsin, things usually move pretty slow. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and not much changes day to day. Back on May 21st, 2016, two young boys were out messing around in a field that spring morning when they saw what looked like a dead deer lying there. They got closer to check it out, and then they realized it wasn't a deer at all. It was the body of a woman. She was naked, badly beaten. Her name was Nicole Vanderheiden. What happened to her ended up pulling in a whole mess of lies, phone records, digital evidence, and a long trial with questions that still hang around for some people. This is about a mom whose life got taken away too soon, a guy who looked like the obvious suspect at first, and somebody else who turned out to hold the real answers. Nicole Nikki Vanderheiden was 31, a warm, big-hearted woman who could light up even the coldest Wisconsin winter. Born Nicole Meyer on March 29, 1985, in Manitowoc, she grew up in a close family that loved her easy laugh, her kind spirit, and how she always put the people she cared about first. Nikki had this way of making you feel like you really mattered. She remembered the little things you said, showed up when you needed her, and her kids were everything to her. She had Michaela and Tyler from her first marriage, lively kids she raised with a lot of patience and pride. Then she met Douglas Dietrich, Doug to everyone. Things moved quick between them. They hit it off, got serious fast, and soon had their son Dylan, who was only 6 months old when everything happened. They lived together in a simple house in the Ledgeview area near Green Bay. It was the usual family chaos, kids laughing, toys everywhere, the everyday stuff that keeps a house going. Nikki juggled being a mom with her job as a substitute teacher in the Green Bay Area Public School District since 2012, mostly in elementary and preschool classrooms. People who worked with her said she was dedicated and great with little kids. She made stories fun, turned lessons into something exciting, and always left the room feeling a bit happier. Friends talked about her energy, how she had this real zest that pulled people toward her. She was tight with her parents, siblings, and the whole extended family. They all relied on her steadiness and kindness. Things weren't always smooth. Like a lot of young families with 3 kids at different ages, money was tight, parenting was exhausting, and yeah, there were arguments here and there. Nikki and Doug had their rough patches, fights that came from being tired or just not understanding each other. But they talked about the future, about maybe getting married, about making it work long term. That spring in 2016, she was excited for nicer weather, more time outside with the kids, maybe even a night out once in a while to unwind. On the evening of May 20th, that night out finally happened. Nikki and Doug went to a place in Green Bay called the Sardine Can. Sometimes people mentioned it along with spots like the Watering Hole for some live music and hanging out with friends. It was meant to be low-key, drinks, laughs, a break from the routine. But the alcohol kicked in, things got heated, and what started as fun turned into a real argument. People there saw them fighting out in the open, voices up, tension spilling over. Around 11:30 p.m., Nikki got upset, walked out, probably just needing some air. She texted a few friends, maybe asking for a ride or just blowing off steam, but then nothing. No more messages, no calls. Doug headed home alone later, figuring like a lot of couples do after a fight that she'd calm down and come back when she was ready. The babysitter was at the house with baby Dylan. Michaela and Tyler were with their dad for the weekend. Doug went to sleep, expecting to see her in the morning. The house stayed quiet. When morning came and she still wasn't there, worry set in fast. He called the police. By that point, the night had already taken her. Every tragedy has its timeline. Let's walk through what investigators eventually pieced together about Nicole Vanderheiden's last hours, the night of May 20th into early May 21st, 2016, step by step based on what came out in the investigation. The evening started off normal enough. Nikki and Doug went to the Watering Hole in Green Bay for a concert with friends. Music was playing, people were out, drinks were going around, everyone catching up and having a good time at first. But as the night went on, things got tense. Surveillance video from the bar shows Nikki dancing and laughing inside earlier, then heading outside. Around 11:30 p.m., after a real argument with Doug, alcohol involved, some jealousy, built-up frustrations, she got mad and walked out. She sent some sharp texts to Doug, maybe tried reaching out to friends for a ride or just to talk. She ended up heading to another nearby bar, the Sardine Can on Broadway downtown. Video there catches her arriving, still looking lively, hanging with friends, trying to make the best of it. Doug didn't follow right away. He stayed back at the watering hole with a friend, Greg Matthew. By around midnight to 12:30 a.m., that's the last clear public sighting of her. She seemed upset on the footage, maybe a bit off from the drinks and the fight. Phone records show her texts and calls trailing off after that. No more activity from her phone in that window. What happened next, between roughly 12:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., is where it turned tragic. Forensic evidence and digital trails later filled in the gaps. She was strangled with something like a cord, similar to a phone charging cable, and beaten hard enough to fracture part of her skull and cause brain bleeding. The medical examiner said she was still alive through both the strangling and the blows. There were defensive wounds on her hands and arms. She fought back hard. Bruises and injuries covered her body, arms, legs, back, face. In total, they counted around 241 separate marks, some from hits, others from being dragged or stomped on. There was also evidence of sexual assault. She was found naked except for socks and a pink wristband from the bar that night. Her face was so swollen and messed up they needed a forensic dentist to confirm it was her. Her body ended up in a field in Bellevue, about 3 to 4 miles from the house she shared with Doug in Ledgeview, left out in the cool spring air. Her clothes, purse, and shoes, all bloody, were dumped along a highway on-ramp on State 172 near Monroe Road, roughly a mile from the field. It looked rushed, like stuff thrown out of a car while moving. Around 9 a.m., on May 21st, those two young boys came across her in the field. At first they thought it was a dead deer, then realized what it really was. Police got there fast, taped off the area, and it hit everyone. This was serious, no accident. The autopsy estimated time of death sometime between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., when most of Green Bay was asleep, no idea what had happened nearby. Who did she run into in those missing hours? At first, suspicion landed on Doug. The public fight looked like motive. He didn't report her missing until around 4:30 p.m. that day, after her body had already been found, which seemed off. He spent the morning calling friends and family, checking jails, getting more and more worried as time went by with no sign of her. But as the evidence came together, phone data, other digital records, forensics, the picture shifted, and it started pointing to someone else entirely, a stranger no one expected. The Brown County Sheriff's Office didn't waste time. Within hours of the boys finding the body that morning, detectives showed up at the house in Ledgeview where Nikki lived with Doug and little Dylan. They went through the place carefully, every room, closet, drawer, looking for anything that might explain what happened. At first, a few things looked bad. There were blood-like spots on the garage floor. More in Nikki's car, on the headrest and in the back seat. A footprint near the car. Even over at a neighbor's yard, they found small amounts of blood and some blonde hair clumps, which made it seem like maybe something had gone down right there in the neighborhood. Doug became the main person they were looking at. The argument everyone saw at the bar gave them a reason. Jealousy, anger, a fight that got out of hand. Plus, he waited so long to report her missing, which didn't sit right. They brought him in to talk. He was cooperative, still wearing the same Fitbit he'd had on all night, even during the interview. But with the physical stuff adding up, they held him for 18 days. Long interrogations, more searches, the whole thing weighing on him while he was grieving. Then the lab work started coming back, and things changed. The blood in the garage? Not human. It was turkey blood from a hunting trip Doug had been on recently. The stains in the car and on his shoes? Tests showed they weren't blood, or at least not Nikki's. No match. The stuff in the neighbor's yard? It didn't connect clearly to the crime the way they'd first thought. Nothing put Doug right at the scene of the violence. No DNA from him on her body, no obvious signs of a fight at the house. With that clearing away, his story held up better. They pulled the data from his Fitbit through the app on his phone. during the time they figured she was killed, about 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. The tracker only recorded a handful of steps, like fewer than a dozen. That fit with someone basically asleep or not moving much at home. Fitbits aren't perfect. People later questioned how reliable they really are, but paired with how he moved in interview videos and what other people said, it helped rule him out. They let him go. The boyfriend wasn't the guy anymore. The search opened up. Detectives talked to people who were at the bars that night, friends like Greg Matthew, who'd hung out with Doug, went back over surveillance from the watering hole and sardine can. They followed every possible lead, who might have given her a ride, who she could have run into. It took months, processing the bloody clothes from the highway ramp, testing the cord they thought was used to strangle her, checking the socks she still had on. Then the crime lab got a break. They found unknown male DNA on one of Nikki's socks. The killer hadn't taken those off. More of the same male DNA turned up on the cord and other spots on her body. None of it matched Doug. They put the profile into CODIS and other databases. In August 2016, it hit George Stephen Birch, a 39-year-old from Virginia. He had no connection anyone knew of to Nikki or Doug, but he'd been in the Green Bay area around that time, visiting family or something like that. How did he cross paths with her? That question kicked off the next big part of the investigation. The forensic evidence didn't leave much room for doubt, and it all pointed straight at one guy. Analysts at the State Crime Lab confirmed Birch's DNA matched samples from 16 different spots on Nikki's body, including areas that lined up with sexual assault. His DNA was also on the black cord that had been used to strangle her. It left clear marks on her neck, and on the sock she still had on when they found her. These weren't random traces, they were right in the middle of what happened. None of Doug's DNA showed up anywhere in those samples. The physical connection was solid, but how did this random guy from Virginia get mixed up in all this? The key came from the digital side of things, the stuff we all leave behind without thinking. Back in June 2016, Birch had talked to Green Bay police about a separate hit and run, and he'd agreed to let them pull all the data from his Android phone. A couple months later, when the DNA match linked him to Nikki's case, detectives went back to that phone data. They saw he had a Gmail account, which meant access to Google's dashboard. That's the feature that tracks your location history using GPS, Wi-Fi, and cell towers. They got a warrant for the full records. Forensic analyst Tyler Belling put together this detailed timeline from it. The data showed Birch's phone at Richard Cranium's, a bar close to the sardine can, until about 2:30 to 2:45 a.m. on May 21st. Then it moved to the house on Berkeley Road, where Nikki lived with Doug, getting there a little after 3 a.m. and staying for almost an hour, until around 3:15 to 4 a.m. Next, it headed to the farm field on Hoffman Road in Bellevue, pinging right at 3:54 a.m. In a tight spot, just a 9.84-foot radius circle that put him basically on top of where her body was found. A few minutes later, around 4:05 a.m., the phone was at the State 172 on-ramp, where her bloody clothes, purse, and shoes got dumped. By 4:22 a.m., it was back at the place Birch was staying locally. This wasn't fuzzy guesswork. Belling's maps had these precise circles that got smaller at the important spots, thanks to stronger signals. The path made a clear loop, from the bar to the house, to the field, to the highway, and back home. It matched the time frame for when she was killed perfectly. And there was more in the digital trail. Birch's phone browser history showed he checked news stories about Nikki's death and the investigations 64 times between May 22nd and June 6, 2016. He was searching for updates, reading articles, following developments. If he wasn't involved, why keep tabs on it like that? Was it guilt, worry about getting caught, or just something twisted? It raised a lot of questions. His background added to the picture, but not in a clear way. He had a record of assaults and DUIs, nothing huge like this before. No ties to Nikki or Doug that anyone could find. Detectives figured it was a random run-in at the bars, Nikki out there alone after the fight, maybe taking a ride or talking to a stranger. Whatever started it, if anything did, turned bad fast. The way she was found naked, the brutal injuries, the assault signs, it looked like something predatory. But the exact reason why? That part stayed unclear. No matter the data, it all added up. DNA on her body and the cord, location pings tracing every move, those constant searches showing he knew too much. The evidence against George Birch wasn't just bits and pieces. It was like a map laid out in data and locations. February 19, 2018. The courtroom in Brown County was packed and quiet as George Birch's trial for first-degree intentional homicide got underway. The prosecution, with District Attorney David Lacey leading, laid out their case over several days of testimony. Forensic experts explained the DNA matches, Birch's profile on Nikki's body in multiple spots, on the cord used to strangle her, and on her sock. Digital analyst Tyler Belling showed the jury the Google dashboard maps, walking them through the phone pings that put Birch at the bar, then outside her house, at the field where she was found, and at the highway ramp where her clothes were dumped. Witnesses talked about the night at the bars, the argument between Nikki and Doug, her last texts. The medical examiner went over the injuries, around 241 in total. Defensive wounds showing she fought back, signs of sexual assault. Nothing in the forensics pointed to Doug Dietrich at all. The evidence came together piece by piece, steady and hard to argue with. The defense pushed back right away. They focused on Doug Dietrich, the guy who'd been the main suspect early on, saying he was the real one responsible, jealousy turning into something violent. They questioned the new tech stuff. How accurate was Fitbit data really? How reliable were those Google location pings? They brought in friends and people from that night to give different takes, trying to create reasonable doubt about the digital evidence. Then, on day 8, Birch himself took the stand. Under questioning from his lawyers, he admitted he was with Nikki that night. He said they met up at Richard Cranium's, flirted, and he drove her to her house in his SUV. There he claimed they had consensual sex in the back seat. But then he said, Doug Dietrich came out of the house, caught them, hit him on the head with a gun, and knocked him out. When he woke up, Birch testified Dietrich was standing over Nikki's bloody body and said something like, "Look what the fuck you made me do." Birch said Dietrich held him at gunpoint, made him help load her body into the vehicle, drive to the field on Hoffman Road, carry her out there, then dump her clothes on the on-ramp before letting him leave. His version tried to account for his DNA, the locations, even why his phone was at her house. But it didn't hold up well. No gun was ever found. No evidence showed Birch had been hit. No blood, no injury on him. Doug's Fitbit only showed a few steps during that whole time window. No rushing around, no driving anywhere. No one saw any confrontation outside the house. On cross-examination, Birch got defensive, and prosecutors pointed out inconsistencies in what he said. The defense kept arguing the evidence really pointed to Dietrich. The prosecution said the DNA, the data, and the lack of anything backing Birch's story left no real doubt. Closings were heated. The defense asked the jury to see it as jealousy and a cover-up by Dietrich. The prosecution kept it simple. The evidence doesn't lie. After deliberating for a little over 3 hours, maybe 3 to 3.5, the jury came back. On March 1, 2018, they found George Birch guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. Judge John Zakowski pulled them to confirm. Nikki's family and friends sat there quietly crying as the verdict was read. Birch got sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. He appealed, but the conviction held up. For the people who loved Nikki, it was justice, finally. But going through the trial, hearing all those awful details again, left marks that didn't go away even after the judge banged the gavel. Nikki's family got some measure of closure with the verdict, but the hurt doesn't just go away. Her kids, Michaela, Tyler, and little Dylan, are growing up without her there to hug them, laugh with them, or guide them through the everyday stuff. The students she taught miss out on that energy she brought to the classroom, the way she made learning feel fun and safe. Doug Dietrich was cleared, but carrying that early suspicion left its mark. He had to live through the accusations, the stares, the what-ifs, while grieving the loss of the woman he loved and the mother of his son. He eventually moved forward, rebuilt what he could, raised Dylan, and stayed connected to the older kids. The case ended up making bigger waves legally too. In 2021, the Wisconsin Supreme Court looked at how police used Birch's phone data, the stuff pulled from that earlier hit-and-run consent, and ruled it didn't violate his Fourth Amendment rights since it came from a warrantless extraction he'd agreed to before the murder link. That decision kicked off a lot of talk about privacy, digital tracking, and what rights people really have when their location history is sitting in some company's servers. Still, even with the conviction and the life sentence, some things never get fully answered. How exactly did Nikki and Birch cross paths that night? Was it just bad luck, her being out there upset and him happening to be around? Or was there something darker at play from the start? Those 64 searches he did on news about her death? What was really driving that? Guilt eating at him? Fear of getting caught? Or some kind of twisted interest? And out in those quiet fields in Bellevue, even years later, you can imagine people wondering if every loose end is truly tied, or if something's still sitting just out of sight in all that data. It's the kind of case that sticks with you, not because of dramatic twists, but because real lives were shattered, and some of the why will probably always stay a little out of reach. If you found this story meaningful, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber helps us continue sharing stories that matter.